All right, guys, before we get into today's episode, I want to let you all know that we're doing a limited run 1000 SP poster set. We've got 2 different designs, 15 of each, and that's it. We've got 30 total. We've got the rear shot in 11 by 17, and we've got a rear quarter shot in 11 by 14. I've hand numbered each one 1 through 15, and once they're gone, they're gone. So head to ludwicksgarage.com right now. The link is in the video's description below to order yours. Now let's get into today's video. What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're at the end of the year. I've moved back to New Hampshire. As you can see, we are in full-blown winter now. And I wanted to film a video showing you guys all of the projects I have, both current and stuff that's just sitting on the back burners, stuff I started years ago, stuff I have yet to start. Nonetheless, I'm gonna do my best to show you guys everything I own for automotive projects. Now this one's gonna be a little bit more difficult to film because since I've just moved to New Hampshire, I'm still working on the shop. If you've been watching the last few episodes, you'll notice it's been a small series of building the new shop out. And since that's not done yet, I've got my projects sprinkled everywhere. So I'm gonna do my best showing you guys what I got and how we can film around them. And we're gonna start with the bus. It's pretty cold out today. This is not making things easier. So this is something that I had searched for many, many years, a dream project I never thought I'd ever get a chance to tackle. This is my 1946 flexible clipper. Now this is a short wheelbase clipper. From what I've gathered, they only made a few thousand of these, a couple thousand, I think, to be more precise. Some were short wheelbase, some were long wheelbase. This is a 6-window. They made a 7-window, which has been seen in film and cinema. Flexible was a coach builder for many, many years before 1946 as well. This was built in Loudonville, Ohio, probably assembled in Loudonville the year that we exited World War II in 1945. It's crazy to think the climate in which this bus was built and the mindsets of the people who built it. You know, just World War II was just such an insane period in human history. But if you guys haven't seen the 2 episodes on the channel of this bus, one was my father and I traveling 4,000 miles round trip to go get this thing out on the Colorado-Kansas border in western Kansas. And the second was getting it running and actually driving for the very first time, and only God knows how long. 40 years, maybe more.
Hey, reverse!
No way! No way are we driving this thing right now. Go back and watch those 2 episodes. They're huge episodes for me. It was just such a crazy experience to go on such a wild trip with my father to go get this thing. I'll leave the links to both of those videos down in the description below. The state of this thing is just incredible, and there's no rot anywhere on this bus. At first, I didn't know how long this thing had been in Goodland, Kansas. Goodland. We found some evidence of how long it's definitely been in Goodland. Inside the bus, and I'll show you guys that when we go inside. But it sat in a field in western Kansas for decades. And another thing that's really cool that I haven't seen on any other clipper are these windshield wiper box guards, or they're guard boxes rather, with these louvers on them, 3 different rows of louvers. I've not seen these on any other clipper. And it looks pretty original. So that's a pretty cool feature to this bus that I haven't seen on any others. Also, it's got yellow inner lights, just like the Corvair. Now, I added the yellows to the Corvair years ago, 10 years ago maybe. So the fact that this has yellow inners too was just another selling point for me. So for those of you who don't know, I found this bus randomly and on a whim on a cross-country drive home from Utah from the Overcrest Rally this spring in May of 2024.
You can figure the logistics out.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's going to a good
I'd
home.
like to say thank you as well, but I don't know what I'm getting myself into.
And like I said, there's no rush. I mean, don't feel like you're pressured.
Yeah, well, I
to get
appreciate
it out
that.
of here.
Yeah,
But
I appreciate that. I'm having a bit of a meltdown right now, but I've talked about something like this for...
You've been looking at every bus we pass with your imagination, and not a single one has come close to what this is.
He's like, there's a number. I'm like, yeah, you gotta call it. You gotta call it. Call it right now.
We don't have room for it in my father's shop or my shop, so we're gonna have to wait till spring to dive into this, but I am champing at the bit to get to this thing. So stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to see this thing start and come together. So, welcome aboard Ludwick's Express. And I think we actually might put that signage on the side of this thing when it's done. It's crazy to think that people would get in these buses and travel clear across America. Get on one in Boston and take it to Dallas, or maybe even cross country. But although some bus enthusiasts seem to be a little upset that we are modern power plant swapping this, we're gonna bag it, it's not going to be a restored RV or something. It's an RV conversion, which these all are. I am just stoked that this bus is going to live a new life and continue to drive down the streets of America, maybe even beyond, and it's not gonna get crushed. So imagine entering this bus and utilizing the space here to have like a mid-century modern layout, to just have a vintage aesthetic and feel inside this bus when you enter at shows. What I want to show you guys, other than just the interior of this bus, is what we found on the inside of this door panel. Now you can tell that down the side here, this is just plywood. Well, we took this piece of plywood off to gain access to the locking mechanism when we transported it, and we found something really cool. So here's a look at the inside of that door card. And on the inside was some pencil handwriting that says Clarence Hunt, Route 2, Goodland, Kansas, March of 1960. How cool of an Easter egg is that? That's written on the inside. So that wasn't visible from the outside here on this paneling. You had to actually remove that door panel to see this writing. That is 65 years that this bus was in Goodland, Kansas, whether or not it's been sitting that long or it's just been in that area. I am keeping the outside completely original. We're leaving all the patina. If anything, we're gonna touch up some of this outline, maybe gold flake some of this. I'm gonna leave all the patterns, all the patina. The outside of this bus is not changing at all. I wanna have some amenities when I'm driving this thing. I wanna be able to cruise at highway speeds, and I wanna be able to tow, haul, and just go wherever I wanna go in this thing. So we're gonna modernize the underneath, we're gonna modernize the powertrain, and we're gonna keep this thing looking just the way I found it in Goodland, Kansas, sitting in a field. Okay, it is cold out. I'm gonna start working a little more expeditiously. I think that's a word. So this is it. This is what's going underneath the 46 Clipper. This is a 1992 Bounder. It's a motorhome, 1992. Now, I do have an episode on the channel of my father and I going to get this thing. Now, he found this on Marketplace up here in New Hampshire while I was still living in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Yeah, it's crazy driving this with no brakes. So just like the Clipper, this Bounder is also a pusher, meaning the motor is in the back and pushes the motor home forward. Now what's in this is a 12-valve Cummins turbo diesel with 39,000 miles on it. And that is ultimately why I bought the Bounder, because it had a low mileage Cummins in it. A few of you on the Bounder episode expressed concern about this thing going in the bin. Well, let me reassure you that that is definitely happening. The amount of water damage and rot that is inside this thing, and mold and just poo-poo and disgustingness, is through the roof. Even if you're an American, but if you're overseas and you're from Europe and you think that these American pusher RVs are the coolest thing ever, you can find them any day of the week for almost any price range. This thing is definitely not ever going back on the road with a family of 4 cruising across America. The inside of this thing is disgusting. Salvage whatever appliances or whatever might be worth something and move that on to someone who needs it, who's got a Bounder. And we're going to use the Oshkosh frame that's under it for the undercarriage and the clipper. So the plan is to shorten the wheelbase, because this is a frame and the clipper is a unibody, and put the whole drivetrain underneath this, under the bus. So there's really not much else to say about this bounder other than the fact that it's going to live on underneath the coolest bus ever. And that's really all I need it for. It's really all anyone else needed it for, honestly. I mean, if you were gonna salvage that 39,000 mile Cummins and Allison automatic transmission, you'd rip it out of this thing in a heartbeat and just scrap the rest of it. So with the Cummins and the Allison and this rear end, it's too long to fit in the bus. It'd stick out the rear end. So we're gonna look at alternate options, and I think a manual gearbox might be that. I think the NV4500s or 6500s are shorter than the Allisons. All of you Allison NV4500 Cummins nerds, drop down your info below. Let me know if the NV4500 is shorter. We got one on site here, so we're gonna measure it too, but drop it down in the comments because that's fun. Moving on. Okay, so this is a 1966 Chevrolet Corvair. I bought this as a parts donor. This is a convertible. It sat for 38 years or something like that when I bought it in late 2013, and it sat in the grass. So you can imagine what happened to it. The top rotted, filled up with water, then the bottom rotted because it sat in the grass. So this thing is irreparable. There's no restoring this thing. I actually bought this thing for about $250 shortly after I bought my Monza, my 65, which we'll talk about here shortly, because I needed a front cross member out of it. We had to basically redesign the control arms and upper and lower mounts on the whole front cross member. So we wanted to have an extra one just in case we needed it. So this has been sitting here at my father's shop out back since 2013. So sorry, Dad, for filling your yard up with junk. It's got good parts. Door handles, mirror, gas door, like I don't, it's got parts, you know, and although they did make over 1 million Corvairs, they're becoming more valuable and harder to find, and parts are expensive. It's a car I own nonetheless, so yeah, that's one of a few Corvairs. Something else that's noteworthy around this Corvair, and although it's not an actual car, is my cache of super rare BMW 700 parts, and some Ford parts that my dad has. But I have a whole nother hood, which has beautiful patina to it, a couple of doors, some red BMW 700 doors, and I know this stuff really needs to be inside, but honestly, these panels sat on a car outside in the woods for 45 years or so. So I do want to get them inside, but I do have some BMW 700 parts that, yeah, are sitting around. This, if you guys know, you really know, this here is the mini tank, and my father and I built this in 2010 when I had a Volkswagen. It was like the first car I ever really modified suspension on, something that wasn't bolt in, that required cutting and welding. And my dad and I built this on top of a go-kart chassis with a working cannon. It's basically a potato cannon with a MAP gas chamber in the back, so you could put projectiles in it and actually shoot stuff out of it. If you remember, this thing was on the cover of Eurotuner magazine in 2011. I think it was the November of 2011 issue, well over a decade ago, and it still sits here. Okay, more air-cooled stuff, more air-cooled goodness, in my opinion. If you're still watching, you too don't believe that all of this stuff is junk. Starting in the foreground here, this is a 1970 Volkswagen Beetle, as the shape under the tarp may give away. My good friend John, who I grew up with, a childhood friend, started this project with his father back in high school in the early 2000s, maybe even late 90s, and unfortunately they never finished it. They had lots of new parts. I don't know what really happened, but it just sat for well over 10 years and they didn't touch it. Well, John ended up giving it to me, knowing that I was into this stuff. He didn't really have the time to try to list it and sell it. The body had a bit of rust in it. They didn't get to the body. They basically started with the motor and the pan and all that. So it's got a good ball joint IRS pan under it, which I figured I'd use for some cool body swap project in the future. That's an S10 frame next to it. That's my father's. Hot rodders know. S10 frames make good body swap projects too. But the coolest stuff of the lot right here, 2 Chevrolet Greenbriers. Now, if you know, these are the Corvair vans. These have the flat 6 air-cooled Corvair motors in the back. So these are rear-engined, air-cooled Chevrolet vans. It's crazy. Most of you know they made a pickup truck out of them too. They had the ramp side. They even had the Lakewood, which is the wagon and the early model only. The vans are technically early model only. This is the only body they made the vans in. Now this one here is originally a California Greenbrier. Hard to believe by the look of it. But this sat in a local friend's junkyard right here in town. My father and him grew up racing together, and this thing sat for decades on the back of a ramp truck he had out in the woods, and I've wanted it for the longest time. And just as I was moving to Chattanooga, Tennessee, my father just so happened to talk to him about it, and he was willing to sell it. And my father ended up buying it and ultimately almost making it a surprise. Kayla and I came up to visit them for Christmas one year, and it was just sitting here in the yard. Not sure what the fate of this is. Originally, the plan was to just get the undercarriage sorted, mechanical sorted, body drop it, bag it, get it running and driving, and just a cool, rusty, patinaed Greenbrier skating down the road. Shortly after that thing came here, my dad found this one on Marketplace and went and bought this. And this was, for what Greenbriers are bringing for money right now, this was an incredible deal, so he couldn't pass it up. And this is in much better shape than the one next to it. Obviously, it's glass in, it's got far more trim, it hasn't been in an accident, it's pretty rust free. So I think this one's gonna be the one that sees its turn at some point here on the channel, and we've got the other one to act as parts. So envision this thing, body dropped, slammed on its sills, skating down the road with cool split wheels, 3-piece motorsport wheels up underneath it or something. Yeah, one day, if there's enough time, if we live long enough. Okay, moving on. Okay, so mentioning it only because I know some of you would have noticed it and asked about it. This square body cab and chassis here was my Uncle Tim's, and that's who recently came to the new shop to pave that apron to smooth out the transition into the right side bay in my shop. And this truck was a part of his fleet many, many years ago. And I think this truck actually came from Florida originally, because in the winters he would move his whole operation down to Florida, where he would continue seal coating and paving, because here in New Hampshire, clearly the paving comes to an end. This here is a magnetic sign that my father had for his towing business, which was called Auto Rescue, Ludwick's Auto Rescue. And behind this, actually I haven't seen this in years, behind this should be Tim's old paving livery. If I can get this off in one piece. Wow, look at that. Ludwick seal coating. He still has this unit, this 3-wheeled seal coater. So the original plan with this truck, real quick, was we were originally thinking of using this frame underneath my 52 cabover, and we didn't end up going with that. The new daily driver. It's white. I don't remember what, it's like a 2011, 2013. It's a Mark 6 Jetta. It's got a TDI 6-speed manual transmission, black interior. That's it. I don't know. That's the next one in the fleet. That's the new daily. I know I kind of hinted that I got a new daily driver a couple episodes ago, but it's this. It's got high miles. It's got like 220,000 miles. Cool. All right, on to the next one. All right, guys, so here she is. This is my 1952 Chevrolet 5-window cabover. Now, they made a 3-window version of this. The 5-window has these windows here in the corner of the cab, and originally they put these here so drivers with payload could see through the corner of the cab while backing up, or to just have better visibility out the corner of the cab. Now this, just like the bus, is a project that I've always wanted. Since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with cabovers, and for some reason, the 1947 to 1953 Chevy and GMC cabovers spoke to me the most. For some reason, I just love this body style, this overall shape has just always been my favorite. So in the fall of 2014, I found this on Craigslist out in Mansfield, Ohio. So we trekked out to Ohio with our Doberman Dally at the time and brought this thing back and got right to work on it. It was shortly after that that I went to Maine and got a 2nd-gen Dodge 3500 that took place of the square body cab and chassis that we used the entire drivetrain and frame under. So basically the overall gist was just what we're going for with the bus, was to put the old cab down over a more modern chassis. So I had modern braking, gearing, power plant, and all of that. Now, a lot of you have given me a hard time about this truck pre-YouTube channel, because we had a full head of steam on this truck for quite a while, and then I got busy doing other small project stuff, other projects. And the truck has literally been sitting since 2015. Okay, so we have the 1967 4-door late model Corvair. I picked this up recently while still living in Tennessee. This is originally a Texas car. When I found my Monza years ago, I was originally looking for a four-door late model because I loved the fact that these cars are pillarless, no B-pillar. So with all the windows down, these things look so cool. So this one I couldn't pass up. It's solid. Underneath this thing might as well be brand new. It's unbelievable. So I bought this because I really wanted to document a Corvair bag build because I didn't get a chance to with the Monza. And you may remember back a few months ago on the channel, I found out that the motor is indeed seized. So the thing is not running. My father picked up an early model Corvair for dirt cheap, 4-speed manual with a running motor in it. So perhaps before too long, maybe even this winter, we do a motor swap on this. We put the early model motor and gearbox in it and do brake work and just get it running and driving, which would be great. It's a pretty cool car, pretty stoked on it. Moving on. All right, now before anyone says anything, this early model Corvair is totally rotted. Underneath and inside is completely gone. It's really too bad because the exterior is pretty good, but underneath is just gone. And these are unibody cars. It's too bad. But if any of you have early model Corvairs and you need some parts, this thing will be parted out. So hit me up. Okay. All right, the Fastback. Now, probably one of my favorite air-cooled Volkswagens ever. They're just so cool looking. Now we have gotten it running. We've heard this motor run. It's got a progressive single carb setup on it, and it sounds great. So we know it's got a decent motor in it. It's an automatic. This is by far the most rotted vehicle I own. It is bad, and I really don't know what to do with it. I know a lot of you guys ask about it because let's face it, Fastbacks are super cool, but I really don't know what to do. It might be far too much work. The thing is just so far gone. I'd really like to just slam it, put some cool wheels under it and just have it be yard art, honestly. Very tender. Now this back room was not intended for vehicles, although he can leave a full-size vehicle in here if he wants to. The 700 has nestled in here quite well. Now I'm really bummed I can't roll this thing out. I shoveled out in front of the overhead door here. The bus is straight ahead. Essentially this is a side door. It was just gonna be too much to clear it to get this thing out. And also it's pitch dark out now as well. But here she is, 1960 BMW 700 Sport Coupe. And this one is actually from Germany. It's been in New Hampshire most of its life. I got it off a friend up north in New Hampshire. And if you want to hear the whole story about the extrication of this thing out of the woods, my father and I worked for a full day trying to get this thing out of the woods. There were trees growing inside of it. I never even thought I'd see a BMW 700, let alone be able to pull one out of the woods and put it back on the road again. My father and I built this one together. I learned a ton in the process. As you can see, most of you Volkswagen guys will recognize that's on a ball joint IRS Volkswagen chassis underneath with basically a tube chassis in the body to mount it to the pan. And where the dashboard is in the body of the car in relation to the pedal cluster that mounts on the Beetle pan, we had to extend the steering column by like 18 inches in order to have a comfortable seating position away from the dashboard where your feet are. So you basically sit in the back seat now. This thing actually was a 4-seater, which is comical for how small this thing really is. We shortened the Beetle pan down by over a foot, just about 13 inches to meet the wheelbase of the 700 body. Narrowed beam up front, but only a 2-inch narrowed beam. We cut the centers of the wheels out and moved them out, creating a really high offset wheel so they would fit underneath the body. The fronts are 15 by 4 ET plus 68. And the rears are 15 by 5.5, and those are a plus 65, I believe. But like I said, go watch the video on the channel that shows everything we did to see all the details. This is definitely one of my favorite cars. Just the chance to own a BMW 700. Really looking forward to making some massive changes to this car, working with Max at EvaResto. We're gonna do some wild suspension stuff. I'm gonna tub the rear end. We're gonna custom build like an 8-inch narrowed beam or something. And that way I can run split wheels underneath and not just this one-off custom set that we made. But that's the 1960 BMW 700 Sport Coupe. It's gonna be coming over to my shop here shortly once we get everything set up in my shop. Well, that's basically everything here at my father's shop. That's either mine or a joint venture like the Greenbriers. Now let's get back over to my shop. I've got 2 more cars I want to show you guys, and they're 2 of my favorites. All right, guys, it's the next day. We're back at the house, or the new house and the new shop. And this here is my 1995 OBS Ford F250 with the 7.3 Power Stroke in it. And this is probably one of my favorite vehicles. I'd say it's my favorite vehicle in the fleet. My father, my grandfather, and my uncles all had these things when they were brand new that serviced their businesses. And Ford trucks just played a huge role in my childhood, all the way back to the bull nose, the brick nose, and these arrow nose OBSs, the 6.9 liter, the 7.3 IDI, and these 7.3 Power Strokes. The sounds of those things are just ingrained in the fiber of my being. Like I can hear one from miles away and they just bring back the fondest memories. Some of you guys may remember the dually I had before this. It was an arrow nose, 4-door dually, long box, but it was an IDI. It was a pre-Power Stroke truck, and it was a handshaker with a ZF5 manual in it. The dualies are definitely my favorites, but this single wheel long box extended cab has been one of my favorite trucks I've ever owned. This one's an automatic, so this has the E40D transmission in it. It's 2-wheel drive, just like my dually was. I wasn't really looking for a 4-wheel drive truck because the majority of my miles in these things are over the highway, hauling cars to shows. Basically, they never leave the pavement. Now you'll notice that this one is not fleet white. It's this bluish green color, which I think is an amazing color for these OBS Fords. But the most important thing about this whole truck is that it's an Alabama truck and it's never seen salt, ever. I mean, the rocker panels, the bottoms of the doors, the sills, the cab corners, the bed bottoms, the bed rails, underneath the floors, inner wheel wells, everything is unbelievably solid in this truck. Living in New Hampshire, you never saw these things survive if they were driven in the winter, and no one really put these things up for the winter. They were work trucks. Now, my favorite thing about this truck, aside from the fact that it's completely rust-free, is that it's an XLT fully optioned F250. It's got the Alcoas front and rear. It's got the OEM Ford stamped hubcaps, which you know that I've been a complete nerd about. The rears are new old stock Ford stamped hubcaps that I found. I was not going to put a non-Ford stamped hubcap on there. And I've just gone around the truck and found all the original OEM new old stock pieces, like the 8x10 gooseneck tow mirrors with a 1-to-1 on the passenger side, so it's not a wide angle mirror. You know, these are side specific, even though they're symmetrical and you can run a driver's side on the passenger side, but that means the Ford stamp on the back would be upside down. We can't have that. That would drive my OCD nuts. So we have a left side and a right side. Ford stamp is indexed in the proper way. This was also the first year of the keyless entry, and the key fob is still with the truck and it still works. This thing's got 278,000 miles on it, and I've driven it all over the country. I've hauled 2 cars behind this thing more often than I've hauled one, I feel like, and this thing has just been a complete workhorse. I've put a lot of work into it, but man, this thing is just so cool. Got the period correct looking Cooper AT3 tires on it. My father was a tire distributor at his garage back in the day, and he was a Cooper distributor, so the Cooper AT3s were an obvious choice to go with this. Air conditioning works, heat works, cruise control works. I'll have the cruise control set at 75 miles an hour with 2 cars behind it hauling up the highway with the AC on. So I don't know what parts list lay ahead for this truck. I'd love to tune it. I'd love to do bigger injectors, just give it some more power, make it a little bit more fun to drive. Maybe bring it down just a little bit, you know, maybe do the drop beams in the front and do a shackle riser in the rear, just something subtle. It's got overload bags in the rear, but they're quite old and cracked, so I'd love to redo that at some point. And then do an overload bag setup with onboard air. So I'll have a tank and an air chuck, and I can run air tools if I have to, but also still be able to level the truck out when I'm hauling one of my trailers. I know I said we only had 2 more vehicles to talk about, but I'd forgotten all about the truck. So This is my OBS Ford Power Stroke. 2 more to go now. Let's move on. All right, guys, here is my 1965 Chevrolet Corvair Monza. And it's actually the longest I've owned a car. I did a build thread video on this back a while ago and talked about how I bought this in the fall of 2013. So it's been a little over a decade that I've owned this car. So the cliff notes on this car, if you didn't watch the full video of the build, is 1965. It's the first year of the late model body style. That was from 65 to 69. The car was parked in Chelmsford, Massachusetts in 1973, and there it sat until 2013, more than 40 years later, when I found it on Craigslist and came to get it. The owner was actually going to be taking it to the crusher. You could tell in the guy's yard that this was next in line. The spots next to it had just been imprints of cars just sunk down into the pavement, where they too had sat for decades, I'm sure. So he'd put it on Craigslist as a last ditch effort to see if somebody wanted it. And I was honestly only interested in the 4-speed manual gearbox in this thing. But once I got it up off the ground, I realized how solid it was. It was solid enough to do this with. And I'd always talked to my dad about how cool it would be to roof chop a late model Corvair, and that's exactly what we did. We did a 2-inch roof chop. We'd never done a roof chop before, so that was a first go around for both my father and I. Plenty of early model Corvairs had been bagged and even put on juice over the years on hydraulics. This was nothing new, but I hadn't seen a late model Corvair sitting on the floorboards. I mean, panned out as low as you could go. So that was the goal for this project, was to go just as low as we could go. But essentially we modified upper and lower control arms, tension rods, we raised all the mounts up top and we lowered all the rear ones to really collapse our distance, so we had bag and shock travel to get this thing as low as possible. And in the rear, we basically raised the upper perch up into the body so we could get as low as possible in the rear. So after a few iteration and different designs we had, we finally got the rear sitting on the ground. The inner control arm mounts and the transaxle itself, the case, are sitting on the pavement. And up front, the frame rails and front cross member sitting flat on the pavement. And honestly, that 2-inch was just all this thing needed to look that much more aggressive and that much more mean. When we first finished the car, I ran 15-inch Cragar SS's on it because, let's be honest, a 60s American car just looks amazing on a Cragar SS. But then the wheel enthusiast in me really kind of came out, and I love 3-piece motorsport wheels, so I figured it was time to not only upsize and go up to 16s, but I ran these Epsilon 3-piece motorsport wheels from Japan. These are 1985s, they're all original, they've never been rebuilt, and they still have the original Epsilon flat caps on them. So far, basically all of the cars I've shown you guys have their own character of patina to them. It's just so cool to me. Each car tells its own story, and I just kind of like the preservation aspect of it rather than a restoration. But much like the bus, as I mentioned before, you'll notice I've got the yellow inners on this Corvair. I actually put these in. I found these on a Chrysler Newport in a junkyard, and even though they're a sealed beam, they still work. So when I found the bus and it had yellow inners, I just knew it was fate. It was fate that we ended up there anyway, but the fact that I had yellow inners just like the Corvair was just sealing the deal for me. Future plans, I don't really know. It'd be cool to do some really cool motor swap in it, but honestly, as you already know, we've got so much to do here, and I'm just gonna continue to maintain it mechanically so I can enjoy it and drive it, maybe switch some wheels up, do some simple things to it, and just focus on the stuff that's not yet done or finished. Okay, we got one more car, one of my favorites. Let's move on. All right, guys, here it is, my 1960 Auto Union 1000 SP. Arguably the rarest car I own. I'm not certain how many flexible clippers were built in 1946. I think it was only a couple thousand, or maybe a couple thousand over their 3-year production span. But I do know they only made 5,000 1000 SPs worldwide ever over a 6-year production span, and 900 of them were convertibles. So there's only about 4,100 of these ever in the entire world. Some of you know I had 2 of them for a while, which is just absolutely insane. I found the other one on Craigslist and it came with a garage full of parts, so I had to buy the car to get the parts that I needed for this one, and then I sold the other car. But much like my BMW 700, I'd be willing to bet that this is the first bagged 1000 SP in the world. Now, it's clear to see that this car was not a concourse level car, nor has it ever been restored, and it actually probably never would be restored. This car too was sitting behind someone's house in Ohio, just rotting away, and the undercarriage was completely gone. Surprisingly, the frame was good, but the body was just filled with rot. And the more I cut into it, the more rot I found. So if this thing ever found its way onto a rotisserie for a full restoration, it would cost well into the 6 figures to get this thing done. And these things just don't bring that kind of money. Now, without giving you guys an entire history lesson on Auto Union, it was a German automotive manufacturer that was built up of 4 automotive brands. They had made their mark in motorsport in the 30s and 40s, building all sorts of different race cars and cars for the road. Ultimately, in 1969, Auto Union was purchased by Volkswagen when they dissolved all 4 companies and turned it into Audi, which is why this car has a 4-ring logo on it. Indeed, this was the original Auto Union badge. The 4 rings signify the 4 companies that built up Auto Union. Now, the 1000 SP is such a bizarre looking car. We've got these huge American fins out the back. German companies were doing all sorts of American automotive styling in the late 50s, early 60s. The first car I ever bagged was a 1960 Mercedes W111 220 SB. That's known as the Heckflossen, a fintail car as well. And it just so happens that my BMW 700, which is also a fintail car, is a 1960, as well as this 1000 SP here, a 1960. Also a fintail. Now, these cars aren't called the Baby Thunderbird for nothing, because they obviously resemble a 57 T-Bird out the back. It's obvious Auto Union was thinking of the T-Bird when they designed this car. The car really exudes all sorts of different automotive inspiration. But I think the craziest thing of this entire car was from the factory. This was a 3-cylinder, 2-stroke front-wheel drive car on a frame. Now, I would have loved to have kept this thing 3-cylinder, 2-stroke, because I love oddball cars, and I just think it's so cool that that thing had such a unique motor in it. But since you too now know the numbers of how many of these things were made, you could understand how hard it is to find parts for these cars. If you've been subscribed to the channel and you've been watching this series come together, you'll know just how much work this has been. I've had to build a tube chassis inside the body, and I've put it down over a 1959 Volkswagen Beetle pan. Because guess what? You can buy Volkswagen Beetle parts. So since I had Beetle panned the BMW 700, much for the same reasons I did this car, that was not my original plan for this car at all. I really did want to keep it factory power plant. But once I realized how hard it was going to be to find parts, Beetle pan it was. I've teamed up with my good friends from EvaResto in England, who make bolt-in Volkswagen air-cooled air suspension and static components. So I'm running the EvaResto front bag beam, steering components, and everything that comes with that kit, as well as their bolt-in rear Beetle kit. So this rear bag kit will bolt into your Volkswagen Beetle. No fabrication required. For management, we've teamed up with my old friends at Airlift Performance. I'm running their 3P system in this car, soon to be 3H. In the coming episodes, you'll see us get the height sensors in this thing and get everything calibrated. But I'm running their 3P, 3H manifold management system in this car, which I've run in dozens of my other cars. And even currently, the BMW 700 and the Corvair are both on the 3P system. As with all my cars, you can see that the name of the game for this project was as low as possible. I've taken the pinch welds and most of the sills as well to get this thing to sit as low as possible. Why? Jeez Louise. But I'm looking forward to getting this thing running. I'm running a Type 3 motor in this, since as you can see, we don't have a lot of overhead space. The cars are really compact, so I'm running a Type 3 motor with a dual carb setup on it. I'm really looking forward to getting this thing dialed in and driving this car next spring. And again, I can't stress how stoked I am on having 2 German 1960 fintail body dropped and bagged cars in the fleet. Well guys, that's all we have time for in this episode. That is an in-depth look at all of my junk all of my cars in the stable. It's been an incredible year. I can't thank you enough for all of your support. The channel more than doubled this year. It's been a ton of work, but I'm going into 2025 super motivated. I can't wait to get the new shop done so I can get back to work on the 1000 SP and start on the bus this upcoming spring. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and follow along as these projects finally come together. And make sure to head to ludwicksgarage.com to order your 1000 SP poster while they last. Gonna be doing some more merch soon. We're gonna be doing a winter line, hopefully some jackets and some more sweatshirts as well. Well, that's it for this episode, guys. I hope you all had a wonderful year. I hope to see you in 2025. We'll see you in the next episode.